Welcome to another short story by Jasper's Fabled Realms. I hope you can sit back and enjoy this brief adventure into another world, where legends from stories come to light and blind out the darkness that seeks control. If you enjoy and would like to hear more stories like this, please hit like and subscribe. The Great Hall of King Aldrich's castle was a cavernous space, vast and hollow, where the flickering torchlight danced off marble pillars carved with the stories of ancient victories. The chamber hummed with a tense silence, broken only by the occasional murmur of the Great Council. At the center of the room, the council sat, robed in crimson and gold, their faces drawn with the weight of a decision that could shape the fate of the realm. King Aldrich, though still a man of noble bearing, looked weary, his once proud frame bowed by the unrelenting pressures of war. His eyes, heavy with fatigue, stared at the massive wooden doors as they groaned open, the sound echoing through the hall like a lament. Vaughn entered slowly, his steps measured, each one a reminder of the years he had left behind. His once mighty shoulders sagged under the invisible weight of battles fought, and lost, and fought again. His face was a map of years gone by, etched with scars and lines too deep to smooth out. Yet in his eyes, those sharp, battle-hardened eyes, there was still a flicker of the fire that had made him a legend, though now, it burned low, almost extinguished by time. The hall grew silent, the whispers fading as the old warrior's presence consumed the room. The council watched him, eyes wide, not with judgment, but with a silent hope, desperate, fragile, pleading. King Aldrich's voice trembled slightly as he spoke. "Vaughn, I know you have earned your rest. No one in this room can claim to have given more to this kingdom than you. But," his voice cracked, the unspoken horrors he had witnessed threatening to break free. He paused, swallowed, and started again. "But a threat rises from the east. An orc horde unlike any before marches toward us. They've razed our villages, slaughtered our people. If they are not stopped, there will be nothing left." Vaughn's gaze shifted toward the king, but he said nothing. The silence stretched between them like an open wound. Aldrich's voice softened, carrying the weight of every lost life. "We need you, Vaughn. The people need you." Vaughn's eyes swept the room, landing on each council member. He remembered them as children, their bright eyes full of dreams, when his name had been sung in every corner of the realm. Now they were leaders, yet here they sat, like frightened children once more, looking to him for salvation. His throat tightened, the memories of blood-soaked battlefields and fallen comrades surging up inside him like a tidal wave. "I swore I'd never raise a sword again," Vaughn rasped, his voice like the creak of old armor, worn from years of use. "I've buried too many good men. Too many friends." His voice faltered, just for a moment. "I don't have anything left to give." Aldrich stepped forward, his eyes brimming with a sorrow he barely contained. "Vaughn, without you we are lost. You are the only one who understands war the way the orcs do. They fear you. They always have." Vaughn clenched his fists, his knuckles white against the leather of his worn gloves. It wasn't fear of death that haunted him, it was the memories of every man who had fallen because of the commands he had given. He closed his eyes, the faces of his brothers in arms flashing before him, men he had loved, men who had trusted him, men who now lay silent beneath the earth. What had it all been for? A peace that never lasted. A fleeting moment of calm before the storm always returned. "Why me?" he whispered, though he already knew the answer. "Because you're the only one left," Aldrich replied, his voice almost breaking. "And we need you now more than ever." The room seemed to hold its breath. Vaughn stood motionless, his heart pounding with the ghosts of old battles. Slowly, he raised his head, his gaze locking with Aldrich's. "If I do this," Vaughn began, his voice low but firm, "it will be on my terms. No council. No politics. I command the army, and no one else." There was a murmur of unease from the council, but Aldrich's answer was immediate, his voice resolute. "Whatever you need. It's yours." Vaughn exhaled, feeling the crushing weight of responsibility settle upon his shoulders once more. He had tried to run from this life, from the sword and the blood and the sacrifice. But it had found him again, as it always did. May the gods have mercy on us. Vaughn muttered under his breath, knowing well that the gods were rarely merciful. Days later, the battlefield was a sea of chaos, a storm of blood and fire. Vaughn's soldiers, hidden among the valleys and ridges, fought like men possessed, following his every command as though their lives depended on it, because they did. The orcs came in waves, relentless, brutal, savage. But for every step they gained, they left their dead in piles, cut down by arrows, caught in traps, or impaled on spikes. As the hours wore on, the earth beneath their feet became slick with blood. Vaughn, standing at the front lines, watched as the tide of the battle began to turn. The orc horde hesitated, their fear palpable. Then, from the distance, a roar thundered across the field, shaking the ground itself. Mograak, the orc leader, emerged, his massive frame towering over the battlefield. His skin was ashen, like steel burned in fire, and his eyes gleamed with an intelligence Vaughn had not expected. Mograak strode through the carnage, his gaze fixed on the lone figure standing before the human army. Vaughn met his gaze, his heart pounding in his chest. This was it. The moment he had been dreading. "You've killed many of my warriors today," Mograak snarled, his voice rumbling like a distant storm. "But it will end here. I will crush you, old man." Vaughn felt the weight of the great sword in his hands, its hilt worn and familiar. He had faced many like Mograak before, filled with rage, blinded by pride. "You don't have to die today, Mograak," Vaughn said quietly, though his voice carried across the field. "Leave now, while you still can." Mograak sneered, his jagged teeth bared. "You speak of peace? You who have slaughtered my kind? I will take your head and mount it on a spike." Vaughn's eyes darkened, and for a moment, he saw the faces of those he had lost, the friends, the comrades, the brothers who had fought beside him. "Then you leave me no choice." With a savage roar, Mograak charged, his axe gleaming as he swung it toward Vaughn's head. But Vaughn had lived too long, fought too many battles, to be felled so easily. With a graceful sidestep, he avoided the blow and, in one fluid motion, swung his sword in a deadly arc. Mograak stumbled, confusion flickering in his eyes as he looked down at his legs, severed at the knees. The mighty orc crumpled to the ground, roaring in agony, his blood pooling beneath him. Vaughn stood over him, his sword raised for the final strike. "I told you to leave." And with a swift motion, Vaughn brought the blade down, ending Mograak's life. The battlefield fell into a stunned silence. The remaining orcs, seeing their leader fall, broke and fled, their once mighty horde shattered. Victory was theirs. But as the kingdom celebrated, Vaughn stood alone, staring out at the blood-soaked field. He had won again. But at what cost? The faces of his fallen comrades haunted him still, and he knew, even in this moment of triumph, that peace would always be just out of reach.